So I've got like 9 or 10 prototypes of the African Trooper that we've been designing since like December of last year. It's taken us 6 or 7 months to really get this thing dialed in, and this only represents a portion of the actual prototypes because there's probably another 5 or 6 that maybe didn't have as big of changes. We didn't have the actual boots, and you know, 8 or 9 is enough to go through all the different iterations and show you how we started here. Nice. And ended up with the final product here. So, what is this boot? Well, it's the African Trooper that was based off of our really successful Barefoot African Ranger. This was a little boot that Jim Green designed, and then after he flew out here to the US, we went to dinner for a couple nights, just started talking, and I was like, dude, we should do a barefoot, like 0 drop, let's do this, and we just started chatting about it. Next thing you know, a few months down the road, this thing was released, and it's one of my favorite boots. It's one of the ones I'm most proud of because I helped mostly design the outsole with Jim Green, design the sole construction down. And it's just a really nice little boot that nobody really had made anything like this, and it was just a really cool collaboration. And this boot was designed for their wildlife rangers down in South Africa, protecting the wildlife from poachers and people doing illegal stuff down there. And in South Africa, it's a completely different climate than here in the US, and they like shorter boots. That's why chukkas are so popular in South Africa. They call them fellies, and they work in them, they hike in them, they live in them, and they just like shorter boots. And I don't know if it's because it's hotter, it's just cultural difference, style difference, or what it is, but they just like shorter little boots like this. So I wanted to take this concept of like this anti-poacher boot, this African Ranger boot, and really make it an American version where we combine US boot styling and how people in the US like to wear their boots and how they wear them, and combine that with the South African boot making techniques that make this 360 stitch down, the simplified construction that make them really affordable, really durable, and truly heritage, like traditionally built boot. There just really isn't a lot of brands that are making anything close to a true heritage barefoot style boot where you got the wide toe box, the 0 drop, the flexibility, and all the features that people really love in a barefoot style boot. And as far as I've seen, this African Trooper, this Barefoot African Trooper, is really the only boot that is a true heritage boot in that barefoot style. And to make it fair, I bought 4 of the top barefoot boots to show you guys some other options, because the goal with these collaborations is not to corner the market or push other brands out or other products out and only sell mine and only promote mine. So in fairness, I wanted to show the competition and hopefully shine some light on some smaller brands, some lesser known brands, some up and coming brands, but also some bigger brands. So you know how this compares to those, you know your options, and because ultimately like we review stuff, and it wouldn't be very fair if we just like hit all the other barefoot boots. And so instead, we just double down and we're like, we'll show you all of the barefoot boots, the top ones. Through these collaborations, if we can bring more insight, more knowledge and education to people for their footwear, and especially this barefoot world that's all over the place, that's a long way of saying what we're trying to do here. Now to what the inspiration was for this boot. Well, one of the biggest ones that we talked about from day one was the World War II American or US jump boot. This is one of the most iconic boots of all time. It's got one of the coolest stories, worn by some of the baddest ass dudes, most badass dudes in history. This was a huge one. And you can see how we pulled a lot of that with the toe cap, the very American style counter, the 2-part thing here, the sweep here, the height of it. We also pulled a lot of inspiration from another American classic, the Iron Ranger. You know, it's toe cap boot, little heel counter, similar kind of shape to it. And obviously my favorite American type of boots, Pacific Northwest boots, because they are just kind of the toughest, most superlative boots you can get made in the whole world, really, and they're about as American as they get. And so I wanted to pull all that inspiration and put it into a single boot to combine that South African manufacturing techniques and the way they do things with American styling to make this African Trooper. It's like a perfect anti-poaching boot, like really the only true heritage boot that is a real boot in the barefoot world. But now to the iterations and how we ended up here and started here. So the V1 was just essentially their AR8 pattern on the barefoot platform. You know, nothing changed at all. They just literally slapped it on the different last and glued the outsole on. And so the changes I wanted to make to this right off the bat was add a pull tab and add an extra row of stitching here at the toe, because I just like that double row with 4 stitching. You know, you see it in the Iron Rangers, you see it in the jump boot, and I just like that look. So then we went to the V2, which was still an AR8 pattern, can see it's still just the pattern they already have of a tall boot. They added the stitching, they changed a few things, the pull tab, and it looked a lot better, but the problems that I had with it was like the upper was really, really baggy. The AR8 seems to be more designed for the uppers to come really close together when they're tied, whereas US boots and a lot more like US style of boots is you have a bigger gap all the way up through the lacing. And there's pros and cons to each. There's less bulk if you have more spacing, so there's not as many leather layers you have to bend and fold over your instep. But there's an argument to be made, it could be less durable, but basically for me, all the pros to having a wider spacing far outweigh the cons. So I wanted to adjust the pattern, just make it look more like an American style boot. I wanted to make this single piece backstay into a two piece, more like American style, like work boots. I wanted an eyelet at the top rather than a speed hook, because then it gives you a little bit of room to flex if you don't tie it all the way to the top. And it also allows you to have the ability to tie them really, really tight if you don't want them to come off for any reason. And that little bit of extra room just allows it to flex without creating a really high pressure point right at the collar, which it was solved by the AR8 by having this padded collar. But I don't like the look of the padded collar. It's not the look I was going for, and it doesn't really ever bother me to have a little pressure there because of that eyelet that gives you a little more space. The V3, this is the very first one that we pulled away from the AR8 platform. And this was modeled after the Pacific Northwest boots where the quarter meets at the counter, but it just looks goofy. It just did not work. You know, that zero drop platform, it does not look good on this. And maybe if it was swept back, it'd be one thing, but then the toe would be big. And so I just didn't like it. And I also wanted to add an eyelet because the spacing through the eyelets and speed hooks they're really spaced out. And I like the tighter look. It's a little bit more adjustable. I also wanted to lengthen the toe cap, straighten the toe cap so it doesn't bend across kind of like the African Ranger does. I want it to be straight across like these boots that we pulled inspiration from. I also wanted a little extra stitching on the heel just for redundancy. And the upper flares out really, really far at the top here. And so there's tons and tons of room through the upper. So I wanted to bring that in because once again, that spacing in American style boots, it allows you to have more adjustment, fits more people, and you don't have as much bulk over your top of your foot. So I want to bring that in. So then when we get to the V4, this was the one that I was like, oh, this is gonna be a good boot because this is the first one I really, really wore extensively. And it was the first one I really liked the look of. And you can see I wore it a good amount. You know, I took these hiking, I probably put maybe 20, 30 miles, probably more than that actually, in just hikes alone, but I also wore them a lot just casually because they're so freaking comfortable and they're just easy to put on, and I just ended up wearing them a ton. But there's still some problems with it, like the upper was still too big and saggy. It didn't really get adjusted from the previous version. The proportions were a little bit goofy to me. I wanted to play with the aesthetics of the boot because it just didn't, my eye just didn't like the proportions of it, and so I wanted to play with those. I wanted to adjust the counter height because we're getting a lot of heel slip, and I think it was because it was so structured so high that you just had lots of room for your heel to slip. I'd also noticed in this one that there's such a small gap between the quarter and the toe cap that the boot wasn't flexing naturally. And for a barefoot boot, you want it to articulate correctly for your anatomy, especially for the guys that really, really are deep into the barefoot world. And so it flexed too far back. And so we needed to figure out a way to get more room somewhere in here, not just to make it flex more, but it would also make it more durable because all that flex is on a single fold in this version. And that's just a matter of time before you get a little bit of premature wearing compared to a bigger spacing. The gusset was also too low, and the gusseted tongue was way too big. It was just huge. And so when you folded it up, it just pretty much dropped the gusset down to like the 5th eyelet. The backstay was really, really wide so that when I was side heeling, that was pushing into the side of my heel in a really painful way. So I wanted to bring that in a little bit smaller. And the biggest thing that we adjusted in this, the cool thing about this is through designing a boot millimeter by millimeter, panel by panel, and really going through an extensive designing process, it really taught me a lot about boot manufacturing, boot making, and certain aspects of boots I just really had no idea the design purpose behind them, like this horseshoe shape that you see in all these American style boots, how it kind of comes up through here. And so in the next version, the V5, this was a much better looking boot, a lot closer to proportions. The horseshoe on the vamp made actually a pretty big difference in two ways. One, you don't have a single seam right across your instep still kind of. You don't have a solid seam digging into your foot in one spot. it allows it to spread that sewing line across a larger surface area so you don't get quite as much of a pressure point. But the biggest thing, I just had no idea, and I don't even know if this is still what it was for, but it definitely makes a difference, is when you're folding the tongue and it's straight across, it just bunches a ton right here at the bottom. You don't have anywhere for the leather to go, and so you get these big clumps of leather that you have to break down on top of your foot to really get it to be comfortable. Versus when you have this horseshoe, it allows you to have these little like valleys almost for the leather to bunch up in down the side. And then you also have this height of the horseshoe that allows it to pinch a little bit easier, so that when you do that triple fold, you do the accordion fold, or however you fold them, you just have, it's a more versatile way of using the tongue for how you fold it, how it acts like on your foot. But this boot was really close. This one looks really good. Like you can see the proportions difference between these two, you know, the different, how this one sweeps up higher, more round, like these other boots that we pulled inspiration from. You can see like the quarter, or the counter is pretty squared off. That gap looks really nice. The toe cap was short, so you have a little bit of room right here. And so that one was really good, but I didn't ever actually get this one in hand. I didn't get this until like a few days ago, so I never actually saw this in hand. The next version I saw was the V6. I'm not sure what happened from V5 to V6, but it looks like they went back to the previous quarter panel, and I liked the V5 a lot more. And they extended the counter a little bit. The toe cap was the same, but this is, since I didn't have this one in hand, this was the first one I wore with the shorter toe cap, and identified a pretty big problem right off the bat. And it was this toe cap, because we lengthened this area here, was too short. And so it was digging into my pinky toe. And so I just took a knife and cut that out, because I was like, I still need to wear these. I need to try all the other features, but I can't wear them with that pinky toe being worn out. You know, you can see some of my little markings here, trying to get the proportions right, trying to figure out for the size 10, what are the different lengths that would allow us to proportion this correctly. And you can see one of the solutions that we came up with, me and Taylor, was lengthening the toe cap back out. But the problem with that was you don't have enough room for it to bend right here. And so to solve that problem, we wanted to bring the quarter back so that you end up with this size of space across the toe, but it's not, the toe cap's not too short. And so we marked that all up, put all those numbers there, and I just kind of took this other boot and just drew all over it, because when I'm designing stuff, I just like to freehand stuff. I like to just see it visually and get a feel for it, even if it means marking up a brand new boot and making it look really ugly. It's still worth it to me. And the V6s plus the V5s were so close that I was like, we're almost there. Because to me, that's what makes the difference in my designs when I'm designing, whether it's wallets or camera stuff or whatever it happens to be. It can come down to a couple millimeters for me to, when I get a little obsessive, to make or break a boot. So the V6 was so close, and we knew exactly where we wanted to adjust it and how we wanted it, and I really like some of the elements from the V5, some of the elements from the V6, and to get those last little millimeter changes and just get everything really dialed in, we decided to do an in-house prototype. So what we did is we took one of the old prototypes, dissected the pattern, and then just slightly adjusted the pattern to be exactly how we wanted it to look and feel. And this was another really cool part of this process, was taking an existing pattern and really refining it and figuring out what worked, how it worked, how to get all these little changes made to make it still function and look good while still being able to be made by Jim Green. And we learned a ton from making this pattern, because we wrote the pattern, or we designed the pattern, printed it out, made it all in a PDF file, and with all the instructions and everything, shipped it off to South Africa. And something happened with the pattern that didn't quite work, but they had all the proportions, they had the lines, they had everything they needed to get it across the finish line. But in the meantime, something with the pattern didn't work, and so this was the next version, the V8, but it just didn't work. You know, it's pretty far off there. The counter, I think the counter was from the pattern, but it was really short. So I think it just didn't scale right, and you know, there's just so many differences in patterns that, and it just didn't work. And so we took this, the V8, and tried to take this boot, combine it with this boot and the features we liked, and just really compiled everything that we learned from all the previous 7 or 8 prototypes, and picked and chose every little thing that we wanted. And that's when we're like, I think this is the final design. And that's when we got the V9, which is the final version. And now you can see we pulled you can see how it all kind of meshed together. You know, it wasn't even really as much of a linear process as I thought it was gonna be, but you can see we've got the squared off heel counter from the V7. You've got the lines similar to the V7. You've got the closer proportions from the V6. You know, you've got those proportions we're trying to bring out and exaggerate to make it not look like a clown shoe or a flipper. And you can see from the V5 how that's really close to that similar sweep, similar aesthetic. It's got that horseshoe. And so all those prototypes, all that learning, all those little things that we learned, pros and cons of certain patterning things with the horseshoe, the straight line, the vamp being flared out versus tighter, the gap between, all that kind of culminated into this final version for the final release of the African Troopers. And it's so good. I think it turned out so nice, because just look at the difference between let's just do like the first real prototype we did compared to this. Like completely different boots. Because I think most people would just be like, oh, that's good enough. That's like a barefoot tall boot. Like, that's good. Let's send it. Let's make some money. But this, to me, just is not it. And then you look at this, and I'm like, that's what we're going for. That's got that American look to it. It's got the right proportion. Everything looks really good. That flows really well. It works really well functionally because we figured out all that stuff with the toe cap, the gap here, the quarter being shrunk, this being brought up, the heel stay being tighter, this counter being the right height and the right length, the gaps and the spacing and the eyelets, the gap and the spacing of the tongue size, how it's all gusseted. All that stuff took it from this initial concept all the way to this final boot that looks so good. And the thing is, it's a barefoot boot too. And I know it's like my design and stuff, but just let me geek out for a sec. Barefoot boots just look so ugly. And that was like the biggest trouble with this, was taking a barefoot flat boot and trying to create those curves and those lines to actually make it look like a boot that has a heel, or your classic boot, your American style boots, to a point where when you're wearing them around casually, people are like, what is he wearing? What are those flippers that guy's wearing? They just look like boots. And if anything, they look cooler as they get aged in or worn in, because like, look at this one. This one started to look so nice. And this is an early prototype. This is V4. So when these final ones are worn in, they're gonna look so good. That's kind of the design process. You know, I really enjoy that stuff. It's the whole reason I started this business, because I love designing things. I love that creative process. I love trying to find something that doesn't exist and make it into reality, like a true traditional heritage barefoot boot, or trying to make a barefoot boot look really, really nice. I like those challenges. I like trying to do things new and different. And all the YouTube videos, all the leather good production, all feeds into that, because I like analyzing other people's designs. I like seeing how they do things, why they do certain types of stitching. And so it's really, really fun for me to do this. It's my favorite thing that we're doing right now. It's the only thing that's making all the next moves in the business possible, because we got some crazy stuff coming with that 1 million subscriber mark. We got some cool stuff, and all these collaborations are ramping up to do all that. So thank you guys for supporting these. We'll get you some more information with the different materials, the price, all that stuff. The release is on June 27th. The limited edition email list gets early access, but these are gonna, for a general price range, I think they're gonna be under $250. But get on the limited edition email list so you get early access. I think by 2 to 4 hours, you'll get first in line, so you get your boots first, but you also make sure you don't miss the order or miss the pre-sale or whatever, because it is limited quantities. And the other thing is, next week leading up to the release of these, we're gonna be giving you guys all the sizing information, how to wear, the specs, everything you need to know. So when you get that early access email by being on a limited edition email list, you can get your order in before the chaos and get in the front of the line, all those things. So be on that email list if you want a pair of these, and thank you guys for supporting these. This is, like I said, my favorite thing to do. It's just really cool to do, so I appreciate all your guys' support and checking these out, and let me know if there's anything else you want to know about these. So thank you guys. See ya.